Maybe let's teach this in school so it's an embedded capability in architecture. So that way, when these kids go into firms, they're not just like, sorry for my language, but BIM bitches for everyone else, right? No one wants to do that, right? Why be like a BIM bitch getting paid half of what I could be paid elsewhere?
Most modern.
Okay, welcome back to Most Modern. This time there's no guest, it's just Libo and myself, and we're talking about a subject that we often talk about internally. We talk about it amongst each other, but we haven't talked yet about on the podcast. I think it's very topical, and I think it's really important at this moment. So, Libo, you've been an outspoken advocate for architects to learn to code. Why do we need to learn to code as architects, and what does that mean for the built environment?
Because I think the buildings we produce now are ugly. And I don't think it's the fault of the architects. I think, well, actually, it is the fault of the architects, because you can't create beautiful things in software you don't know how to use.
But isn't it the architect's creative agency that allows them to make cool and interesting things? Why is software the limiting factor?
Because I think right now, if you look at how architects produce architecture, previously we were a lot closer to the production, right? We're using pen and paper. We were able to directly control the outcome. Right now, it's very arm's length, right? We do red lines, we outsource all this stuff to consultants, we hire a bunch of juniors, produce a bunch of things that we don't directly touch. And because I think we don't have that direct interface with what's producing our work, it leads to this effect where we're not able to control the outcomes in a way that moves it into this beautiful space that we want to be, but instead in this buildable space that we have to be in.
Okay, so one factor is just buildings are getting more complex. Let's put it that way, right? There's more consultants, as you mentioned. There's more requirements for sure. And so software is supposed to help us get there, but you're saying it's not enough.
I think that's something we need to delineate, right? There's one thing that's buildings are getting more complex, yes, right? Architects do need consultants in order to do things that we don't know how to do, right? Like structural engineering, lighting, things like that. That's an expertise that you're bringing in. But what we're also doing is we're outsourcing production. I think that's the much more dangerous portion, right? You're kind of exporting this act of creation to a bunch of people that don't think like you, don't understand the project the way you do, don't have that intuition that you bring into that design process. And this arm's length way of creating, I think, is distancing architects from the effects that they want to produce in their work.
Right. Can you walk us through, for somebody who's not so familiar with the building production process, where things have changed and where these potential stumbling points are in the whole sequence of things to get a building built?
I think we could look at maybe back in studio, not to call out anybody, but I think there's a direct relation between one's ability to design things in software and the outcome of the project. I think, in first year when we were learning to hand draw, everyone was on pretty even playing ground, right? We were all able to kind of create shapes, create curves, do these designs. Even though they're not buildable, we're able to express kind of more complexity. As we transition into software, learning Rhino, things like that, you start to see kind of this divergence. Part of the studio, maybe the folks that are a little bit more technology forward, are able to produce these complex forms, these procedural forms, where we now call like grasshopper architecture, right? Where you're designing on an abstract way and kind of outputting drawings from software in that specific way because you know how to produce those curves, those lofts, all of these Rhino terms that I'm now forgetting. But on the other side, you see a lot of people just producing blocks, right? Blocks are easy to draw, right? They're very easy to express, but why are you doing blocks? Is it because you don't know how to do curves? Or is it because blocks are how you express yourself? If you look at buildings today, we see a lot of ugly blocks. Is it because people can't draw curves in software?
Well, I would argue that there's a lot of different pressures, but let's stick to the technical side for now. You wrote recently on your Substack that it's now prime time still, for architects to learn to code. Even though a lot of people are saying, not just architects, but a lot of other people don't need to code because of the advent of LLMs and AI. What's your argument for that? And why specifically is it important for architects and people dealing with the built environment to learn this foundational practice when maybe it can be automated right away?
I think it comes back to kind of that arm's length design thing, right? Like, I remember when I was working at KPF, it was just early Revit adoption. And, this architect was like, I can draw in CAD. Like, why would I learn in Revit, right? And this principal just like yelled at him at a bar, was like, if you don't learn Revit, I'm going to fire you, right? Like, it's kind of crazy, right? Kind of a hard requirement, but this is kind of the evolutionary path we're on. It's like we have rejected technology at every step. There's still architects who don't directly use CAD, who don't directly use Revit, who now probably won't ever want code, right? Why should I do work that I can hire an intern for that someone else can do for me? But it comes back to that core thing where if you don't know the medium through which you're producing your product, you can't express what you want to express. You have to basically like push your brain into someone else to be able to realize the full expression of what you want to do.
Well, there is definitely a culture in architecture, and I think in a lot of other disciplines, but in the creative fields in particular, that's a little adverse to technological change, especially when it feels like that technology is taking over or taking control over the output. Now, I think you're arguing that this is the opposite, that it's not the technology controlling the design, it's us controlling the technology in order to control the design better. Am I reading you right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that you're getting at like the crux of it, right? It's like if we don't understand, if we don't learn, if we don't master the technology is going to control us. And I think if you look at a lot of how projects operate and where certain bottlenecks are, it's often due to a lack of mutual understanding and mutual capability around software. And if you look at folks who are able to go into software, who are able to control these things in a very masterful way, they are like a very rare person that's deployed in these firms on projects that need kind of this specialty. So firms have this kind of divergence where there's special projects where you put people who know how to use software on, and there's non-special projects where you can't afford to put these people on. But this changes the way that you're able to output projects as a firm.
You mentioned different types of technological changes that have occurred. Most recently, before AI and the possibility to really invest in your software, there was Revit. So that's building information modeling for those of you who don't know. Can you walk us through what happened there? Why was your principal telling this guy that he would fire him if he didn't learn Revit?
I think it comes down to the pace of production. I think if you look at pencil to CAD, your pace of production raises a lot, right? If you look at if you go from CAD to Revit, your pace of production increases again. I mean, you remember working in CAD, right? You're like Friday night before a Monday, right? You're like extracting all the drawings into the same kind of CAD file, and then one person has to go make sure all the lines align, like all the columns are aligned, all the elevator cores are aligned, and then inevitably it's not. So then you have to redistribute work again. Everyone has to do it, and you kind of have to come back and reconcile that process. So that's a very like 2D drawing, like CAD-based synchronization and coordination process. If you use Revit does that automatically for you, right? So you get rid of this whole layer of drawing coordination so that you can use that time to push towards higher production. And it's this arms race almost. If you're a firm that's working in CAD versus a firm that's working in Revit, the firm working in Revit is going to move faster, produce drawings at a higher quality, able to produce more complexly coordinated designs at a faster pace. And if you're paying more for labor using CAD, producing the same output, it's going to be ridiculously hard for you to compete.
Yeah, I think one just piece of background that's quite important is to understand that in the AEC industry, your main, I guess, restriction, your main pressure is time. It takes a lot of time to document, to draft, to record the building, in addition to actually conceiving of it and creating it. So any software I agree with you, any software that can really reduce the amount of time that's required to do something, I think is good for business, and it should be good for creativity too, because that means you can spend your time doing things that aren't so manual, that aren't so kind of rote.
But it's also like time allocation, right? It's like right now, because you know it takes you X amount of time to produce, you have to stop design. If you change the design in the production process, you know it adds additional time, right? So you felt this, right? Closer to deadlines, all of a sudden the principal's like, can we move this column? And you're like, right? Like I have to redo this whole process again, stay up overnight, all of this stuff, right? But if you are confident that you can compress that production process, you can spend more time in design, a little bit rougher, spend more time deliberating, because you have that confidence like, oh, I can go from design to output in a day. So I can design right up to deadline and then just say, okay, go.
Right. Well, okay, now I want to move on to your own experience too. Let's move towards code slowly, but talk about how you started to get into coding. I always liked your title, I'm an architect that codes. I'm pretty sure it's from your experience at WeWork when you're doing layouts. Talk through us about what those pressures were that you were feeling and what forced you to go through the discomfort of picking up a new technology, a new type of language, basically, to improve your workflow.
Well, I think this is something that I've learned by myself. So I tried to learn to code several times before that. When I was like a teenager, my dad, God bless his soul, let me buy a C++ book. It was like 600 pages. And I was like 12 years old. I got through maybe the first 30 pages. I got like one thing to run. And I was like, okay, this is way too hard. Like coding is so difficult. But I think WeWork was kind of this like perfect combination of forces. So the way I look at it is like, if you need to increase output, what we usually do is increase input, right? If you need more layouts, just add more people, right? Sure, you can make the systems more efficient, but adding people is really what you can do. The situation I was in at WeWork was I was being asked to produce, 12 to 15 layouts a day for like 19, 20 projects at the same time. It's hard, right? And also the Revit environment that I was working in is pretty optimized. I wasn't making any new families. I wasn't actually making any new templates. Everything was already set out there for me. I just had to produce the layouts.
So you were just the manual labor. You were the brute force in that situation?
Yeah, like a salesperson will come to me and say, hey, like so-and-so wants 200 desks in the building. Is this possible? Or hey, like the desks now change from 3 feet to 4 feet. What does that do to our desk count, right? These are all things that the speed really matters, because then the salesperson can go back to the client and say, hey, this is possible, this is not possible, this is how much it's going to cost you. And that pace is really important when you're trying to close deals against competition. So the speed was needed, the output was needed, but what I wasn't able to do is add input, right? I went to my manager, I was like, hey, can I get some help? And he was like, no. And you're like, okay, well, what do I do, right? I'm at the limit of what I'm humanly able to do. How do I then go beyond that? How do I increase output without adding more input? And code was really the only solution. If you know office layouts, it's pretty templated, right? Your desk configurations, your room configurations are all pretty rule-based. And that's something that's very well adapted to adding just a little bit of code in order to save yourself, clicks.
So basically it served as leverage for you to almost increase your manpower, increase your workforce power without having to go through the bureaucracy of hiring somebody else.
Also, it was really the only solution. If I'm spending all my time producing layouts, I don't have time to climb up the political ladder in order to get more help, right? Like there's only so much you can do.
So what was the outcome there? You picked up these tools. What were you able to then do?
So I think several things. One, I was able to make my work more efficient within the software. So instead of drawing 4 walls and putting desks in it and putting a door, I was able to say, hey, let me just draw a rectangle, and then within this rectangle, automatically lay out the maximum capacity that it can fit. And this is pretty formulaic, right? You have desk clearances, you have wall clearances, you have door swings. All of these things you can embed in code logic and just have an algorithm that lays that out. So that's kind of automation within the thing. Another thing, once I did learn how to code, that was a time saver, reporting from the model outwards. So every time you finish a model, we had to do this. We had to do a desk count, we had to do an area count, we had to do a drawing, PDF output, but we also had to enter that data into another piece of software so that we can track these deals, right? How are these deals moving up and down? Are they asking for more desks? Are they asking for less desks? What is the average desk per square foot that certain types of clients ask for? And a lot of that was manual. I had to not only do the layout, I had to manually punch that in, but the numbers are already there. So with a little bit of code, what I ended up doing was once I hit output, it printed a PDF, but it also pushed that data to the database that we were using. So it not only skipped that manual step, but it also made sure that the data was accurate because you didn't have the chance for human error in between. So it allowed me to kind of look at the whole workflow as a total piece and find where the automations can save me a manual click or a manual type.
So how did you learn? What were the resources? What were the tools that allowed you to pick up this skill without formal training?
Having a project to work on that was a problem that reoccurred daily, having the resources around me. So there were other people in the company at that time who already were ahead of me, like people who knew BIM, who already started coding, already started learning how to build automations. So I was able to learn from them. But also at that time at WeWork, we had software engineers. There was a whole kind of platform team that was building software. And because the organization and the culture was loose enough, I can just reach out and say, hey, I'm learning to code, can you help me? So they were very patient, very friendly, and they were able to sit with me and say, hey, have you thought about it this way? Maybe you should read this book. Maybe you should go down this path, do this toy project first. And that really helped me clear a lot of the really hard to overcome roadblocks when someone first learns to code. And I think that's something that is becoming a lot more accessible now with AI.
Yeah, I just want to touch on that because it seemed like you were in an environment where it was okay to be kind of a noob, to be uncomfortable with this. But a lot of people maybe are saying, well, I want to do this, I want to learn this skill, but I don't have that ecosystem around me. Plus, it makes me feel really uncomfortable when I'm not particularly good at things. I mean, this is something I've been thinking about quite a lot. Is we all often expect that when we start at something, we're going to be great at it, and it's really that discomfort that allows you to push through and then be great at it once you've achieved it. So, for someone who's not really in that environment right now, you mentioned LLMs. How would they achieve maybe some of the same? How would they achieve the same responses that you got when you were working at WeWork?
So I think first part is like learn to love being a noob. It's honestly probably the best place you can be. If you feel like a noob, that means some magic is happening. If you go into a situation and you're the expert in the room, I don't think you're learning a lot. I don't think you're growing a lot. And I mean, at our current old age, I don't think that's something that we should look forward to. I think the second part is LLMs are really good at taking what you give it and spitting something back. So in this situation, right, like I was able to get someone to come look at my thing and tell me something that I don't know. And that's really important. It's like, if you don't even know what questions to ask, this is something that you really need. Someone to look at your situation and say, hey, like, this is something that you have not thought about that you should think about. And actually, LLMs are really good at that. Like when you ask it questions, if you say, hey, like, this is my general situation, please help me think about it in a broader way. Like, what should I be thinking about? What should I be learning? LLMs are actually really good at going out, pulling the right resources back to you in a tailored way to your current situation.
But aren't LLMs also really good at coding themselves? Isn't that something that's changing the workforce environment, causing people to not study computer science anymore and just get into vibe coding?
Hey, look, I think, right now, a situation that I think we're going to be in is that if you're going to invest in a skill right now, InfoSec is a great skill to invest in. All these people vibe coding apps probably have a lot of security flaws in their software that you can exploit. Vibe coding is one thing, but understanding how software is built, how to build resilient software, how to build scalable software, that's very different. And I think actually this vibe coding culture is something that architects should be able to take full advantage of, right? Because right now you can go from, I have this problem, to spitting out a piece of code that might be able to solve your problem in 30 seconds, right? Then you just paste that thing in, see if it works. And that kind of starts that learning loop, that iteration loop. So it's never been easier to get started. But I think as you invest in this skill, you're not getting paid to code. That's not what you want, right? What you want is to have better control, better mastery over the tools that you're using. And it's never been easier to do that.
Well, let's use some specific use cases. Because you were in WeWork, you were putting out layouts for commercial office spaces. It's a very specific type of product, and you're doing it en masse. So there's a need for that sort of efficiency. Say you're an architect who maybe has a small firm, does single-family homes. What type of problems would coding help them solve?
So I think look outside of the software, right? Like, are you answering RFPs? Probably something you can automate. Are you doing a lot of like summary and project management emails? Like, hey, this is everything that's happened this week. Let's summarize and send it to the client. Great. That's something that coding and AI can help you out with a lot. Do you have issues organizing information, right? Do you have a firm wiki that you can probably easily put together with a little bit of help with LLMs? Do you have a component library, right? A blocks library for CAD, a family library for Revit that maybe AI can help you organize? You can just say, hey, this is roughly how I want to organize these files, go.
How about on the creative side? Because I think there is a tension that we're not yet talking about, where we don't want to totally outsource our creative energy and our authorship. At the same time, we definitely want our time back. Where do you think the line is between production efficiency and surrendering your creativity?
So I think the first thing goes back to something we talked about is like time, right? If you make production more efficient, you give more time back to design. I think the second part is capability. When you're outsourcing production, how do you know the people you're outsourcing production to have the capabilities that you need in order to produce the design that you want? I think that's a big question mark right now. You're already hitting the deadline. There's no time for you to hire someone else. You're just kind of stuck, right? But if you're able to take that control back, if you're able to not only save that time for yourself, but also invest that time into learning the methods of production, one, you're much better able to tell whether or not the person you're outsourcing work to is capable of doing what you want. But two, like if you have the time to do it now, why not just do it yourself? I mean, I don't know, like you have a firm, you and Weijia, like what problems are you encountering that you think maybe some code can solve?
Well, certainly the infrastructure of the firm, I think as you're talking about, especially when you're small, you do want to establish templates and standards and you want to have policies and all that laid out. In the past, I would have to dedicate time to specifically like take out away from my production, away from business development to do that, which is just not necessarily what I want to spend my time doing. So I've been using AI to do a lot of that kind of background stuff, to be honest, and also teach me how to do things. Like there are gaps in my architecture career that I just wasn't exposed to, certain aspects of being an architect that I've in the past been kind of insecure about. And now using AI to help me understand that and then asking it specifically, what are the tools to do that as well is really helpful. Personally, I'm not much of a coder, but it's something that I think I'm starting to see how things could fit in. And also once you see that like how the thing works, then you can start to tweak it, experiment, toy around with it a little bit too. I think we're also we do a lot of things that are somewhat formulaic in the sense that it's the same type of product, it's the same type of project in a similar environment. We can get a running start basically on these projects. So I think that's one thing that's really helpful. And I think one nice thing about running a smaller firm and a younger firm is that we don't have any of that cultural baggage.
Yeah.
Like I really don't care. I think it's really hard to run a business right now in this day and age, especially in this economy and with this environment. You don't see architecture fees going up. In fact, you see them either flatlining or going down. The only solution is to maximize your profitability per employee, in my opinion.
Right.
And so if I can find a tool where I pay a little bit of a premium, a couple $1,000s a year maybe, to help me do something, but I can reduce a full-time equivalent, I think that's actually that gives me a lot of hope, actually, that we can run a sustainable business moving forward.
Yeah, and it gives you the ability to outcompete other similar firms who don't have the know-how or don't have the desire to increase that individual leverage. I think I'll give you another example. One of our mutual friends, Reggie, a superstar, we love him.
Reggie Wong and Wong Architects out in Taiwan.
So he built this tool in order to do compliance for his projects. So, like FAR, window ratio, things like that have, Taiwanese local building code compliance. What they were doing was, hey, like they have a schedule in Revit. They would then input those numbers into a spreadsheet, and then that spreadsheet would double check that they're in compliance. And this would take their firm, probably 2 hours a week per project, and they were running like 20, 30 projects. So he changed it to one button, right? Same thing as we did at WeWork, right? Once you're done with your layout, it just pumps that data out into the spreadsheet. It checks it, everything's green, you're good to go, right? Across 20, 30 projects, that's one full-time equivalent, right? You can hire that person to go do something else, or you can save that person in order to make your dollar per employee much higher.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just like finding ways to buy back time, create time machines, little time machines that allow you to do other things, I think is extremely beneficial in architecture these days. And I guess let's talk about the sort of bigger implications. What does this mean, actually? You mentioned that our buildings are not where we want them to be. They're kind of a little bit of disappointment maybe right now, given where technology is. How do you expect maybe a class of architects who are more into coding, more into digital design and technology to inevitably impact the built environment? How is that going to make the world around us, especially for people who aren't in architecture, how is it going to make the world around us better?
I think it comes back to friction. I think right now, if you're not good at software, producing drawings has a lot of friction. And when you're time compressed, you're not going to push against that friction in order to produce the outcomes that you want. You're going to stay with the outcomes that you can produce. So as mastery increases, it'll lower that friction through which you're able to produce drawings. And that ease, I think, will broadly increase the quality and the outcomes of design.
I also want to touch on this other aspect, which I've talked to you about personally. I don't think this is something that is going to be taught in school for a lot of reasons. A lot of it is just legacy. A lot of it is disciplinary protection, let's put it that way. I think this is an interesting topic, talking about coding and technology in general for architects, as a sort of like, once you're done with school, this is what you should pick up right away. And you should be able to transition into learning in an uncomfortable solo environment and understanding the benefits of that moving forward. I think that's probably, if someone were to ask me what would make me a good architect, it's the ability to kind of give up your training and then start to say, okay, what do I need now? And I think this is probably a pretty good example of that. It seems like that's what worked for you too, right, Libo?
Well, I think, I don't know, like if you're the AIA listening to this, like this is a problem you should definitely address. If you're NCARB listening to this, this is a problem you should address, right? Because this is one of the fundamental, in my mind, one of the fundamental causes of talent drain in architecture. It's like, you graduate, you pick up this skill, and instantly you're twice as valuable as if you were an architect. You're doing a job that is a regular 9 to 5, better benefits, better pay, and then you ask your question is like, what am I doing this for, right? I'm passionate about buildings, I'm passionate about design, but do I want to work 14-hour days in CAD, having to ask my principal over and over again to adopt technology, to do things differently? Or do I just go into this space where I'm free to learn, I have a lot of autonomy, and this new skill that I picked up makes me a lot more valuable? I would love for us as an industry to recognize that and pull some of this back. It's like, hey, let's change things a little bit. Maybe let's teach this in school so it's an embedded capability in architecture. So that way when these kids go into firms, they're not just like, sorry for my language, but BIM bitches for everyone else, right? No one wants to do that, right? Why be like a BIM bitch getting paid half of what I could be paid elsewhere?
And it seems like I think technology has also upstreamed the creative industries, because there are now more and more kids, at least in the past decade, who have started to code in high school and in middle school too. And so when you're getting ready to go to college or to go to grad school, you already understand that there's maybe opportunities that are more suited for your own creative aspirations as well as your personal finances. So I think it is definitely a slow building crisis, no pun intended, but it's something that for whatever reason just hasn't really been acknowledged. I tend to think that it has a little bit to do with just personality types. I think there's certain architects who are much more creative thinking, much less on the systemization side of things. I know you, Libo, are a high systemizer. You're looking for efficiencies in every moment. But in order to be creative, in order to free up your time to do those things that you enjoy, that make you human as well. So I think
that's like, we talk a lot about, like, I think especially with people that either come to me or I'm in part of this conversation, was like, okay, the main question a lot of architects ask is like, if I want to transfer, if I want to move to a different industry, what is that thing about being an architect that's most valuable, that's most transferable? And for a long time, I was like, okay, it's your ability to present, it's your ability to express an idea from beginning to end, it's your ability to communicate something that the other person understands. Now, I'm kind of changing my mind a little bit. Now I think actually your ability to think from a big picture perspective and go from big picture all the way down to the nuance and understand what you're doing as a total system, that is incredibly transferable and it's incredibly powerful. But what I don't see a lot of architects doing is using that skill outside of the project. Looking at their firm as a total system, as a total project, and saying, hey, why is my firm this way? Why is my firm ugly? How do I make my firm beautiful? How do I make my process beautiful, right? Take that ability to design buildings and take a step back and then design your firm.
I think it takes some courage to do that, to acknowledge chinks in the armor, or also understand that maybe there are things that you're doing that maybe could be optimized or could be improved or could go against the flow of what everybody else is doing. I would say it's quite interesting too, if you talk about narrative, where your architects are supposed to be good communicators, they're supposed to be good storytellers. I noticed last year when I was teaching that suddenly everybody got really good at presenting. And I'm pretty sure it's because they were running their scripts as they presented through LLMs and just having more precise, more refined language. So technology is also helping us do those more human things. But I think what you're getting at is it's increasing competition for the actual value that the architect itself provides. And we probably need to get to that.
I think that's a good point to wrap up on. I think you summarized it in a very succinct and clear way.
Well, Libo, I just want to encourage everybody to, if they're interested in this conversation or if they're interested more in your thoughts, to read your latest article on your Substack called Why Architects Should Learn to Code in 2025. I anticipate this is, you've been saying the same thing in the past few years, but the environment has changed and you're still as resolute as ever on this endeavor. So it's been a fascinating conversation. I think it's something that will continue to pick up in threads throughout our interviews and throughout our shows. But I think it's something we need to keep up on. And I hope that people out there who are interested can also reach out and give us their perspective.
Yeah, I mean, we'll do the same episode next August, and I'll be beating the same drum.
Unless we've all been automated, at which point, who knows where we'll be.
Well, GPT-5 just got released, and it's not automating jack shit, so I think we're safe for now.
All right, with that, thank you, Libo. I'm Alex Yuen. See you guys next time on Most Modern.
Later, guys.
Podcast of the modern. This podcast called Most Modern.